Okay, the next page, nationalism. So John Quincy Adams becomes the 6th president in 1824. Remember, and this is an election that goes once again to the House of Representatives because nobody gets a majority of the electoral votes. There are 4 candidates in this election: Mr. Adams, Mr. Clay, a guy named William Crawford, and Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson gets the most votes and the most electoral votes, he just doesn't get a majority. Mr. Clay gets thrown out of the vote in the House of Representatives because he had the least amount of electoral votes. And Mr. Crawford has had a big stroke and has been debilitated, so the election really is between Jackson and Adams. And they keep voting time after time, and nobody wins the majority. Remember, in the House, each state gets 1 vote. So finally, Mr. Clay throws his support behind John Quincy Adams for a couple of reasons. One is they both kind of have a bigger view of America rather than, they both are more Whiggish, or what will become Whig principles, like in a national economy sense, okay? Secondly, Mr. Clay does not want Mr. Jackson to gain the popularity as the Western politician, because he wants to be the Western politician. He's fearful of Jackson. So he throws his support towards John Quincy Adams. Adams becomes the president, and we have a cry of corrupt bargain, which means, or what happened. What? So Clay becomes the Secretary of State, which at that time was the position people were jumping into the presidency from. And so Jackson says corrupt bargain. Clay only throws his support so that he can get closer to the presidency by being the Secretary of State. And Jackson begins in 1824 to campaign for presidency for 1828. Okay, he starts campaigning already. This is a time period where you have an expansion of democracy. Land ownership is no longer a necessity for voting. That had been the way people got to vote since the beginning in America, was by land ownership, and suddenly by 1830s they were doing away with that. By 1830 we have what's called free white manhood suffrage, which means all white men who are free, meaning they're not slaves or indentured servants, who are 21 get to vote. Okay. Were there white slaves ever in America? No. Were there indentured servants by 1830? Not that I know of. Okay, so it just means all white men get to vote. Expansion of democracy, so it includes the fact that all white men get to vote. It includes things like getting rid of King Caucus. King Caucus means a small group determine who the candidate will be. And they go with king numbers, which means that they go with primary systems or nominating conventions, etc. Okay? If you follow the local news, to kind of give you an example of this, there's like 9 different people who want to be the Republican candidate for Senate in Nevada and oppose Harry Reid. The 2 names you hear most commonly on the news, well, the 3 I hear are Danny Tarkanian, Sue Loudon, and Sharon Ingalls. But there are a bunch of, there's a guy named Cha-Cha's or something like that. I don't remember all of them. Anyway, there's a guy who registered for the race on a third-party candidacy called the Tea Party, and his name is Scott Ashan. Okay, he really kind of appointed himself the candidate, which is what happened in 1824 with, for instance, John Quincy Adams. He decided he was going to run, so he appointed himself. The Senate caucus named Henry Clay. Okay, a Western group of governors named Jackson. Well, the idea is that we get down to one candidate picked by the people, and that's the idea behind a primary. The people are going to pick who's going to run against Mr. Reid. If you're a Republican people, anyway, you get to pick. Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman who came to America, wrote a book called Democracy in America. They give you a quote, and it's about how wonderful the United States is, and how full of individualism and self-reliance, and how great democracy is, and freedom of religion, etc. It's Alexis de Tocqueville. Jacksonian Democrats and Whigs fought over internal improvements. Whigs wanted them. Jacksonian Democrats didn't, so they killed off, like the Maysville Road. They fought over the Second National Bank. The Whigs were big supporters of the National Bank. A lot of them had money invested in the bank. Biddle was a Whig. Jacksonian Democrats wanted to kill the bank. Okay. Jacksonian Democrats claimed what principles? Did they go along with nullification? No, they did not. Not at all. Did they go along with Jeffersonian democracy? To a certain degree. They wanted the common people to have the say-so in government, but did they want states' rights or central government rights? Central government rights, okay? If they had gone for states' rights, they would have been for nullification. So they weren't for states' rights either. Were they for the pro-wealthy? No. That's why one of the reasons Jackson gives for killing off the bank is that it goes along with the elite too much. It gives them special privilege in government, which is a Jeffersonian principle too, okay? And are they for a strong central government? Yes. In fact, that's why there's a King Andrew I cartoon, because the Whigs who opposed him felt that Jackson was acting like the king. And Jackson certainly knew how to use presidential power. He's a very powerful president because he uses the office to his advantage. Jackson advocated which? States' rights, nullification, Indian rights, rotation of civil government jobs, or federal improvements? Rotation of civil government jobs, which is another way of saying the spoils system, okay? Jackson did all the following: Maysville Road veto, the Indian Removal Act, the four-step bill. He encouraged people to accept Peggy Eaton. He allowed for common people in government jobs, the spoils system, etc. What is the spoils system? Where you think anybody's capable of doing a government job, and you give government jobs to those who support you. So people who are your political party. Whig Party ideals, a national economy that links parts of the country together. So you build roads and canals to help do that. You set up factories and protective tariffs so that factories can sell goods in America. Expansion of America was part of a Whig Party ideal, but Jackson would have supported that too. In New England, who were the Whigs? The wealthy, the guys who owned the businesses, people that were educated. Tariff of Abominations, 1828. This is the tariff that makes Southerners really so very, very angry. This tariff raised the protective tariff on things like textiles really, really high. So the British counteracted with tariffs on American goods. So when you as a cotton farmer took your cotton to England, you didn't get as much profit because you had to pay a higher tariff. And that ship that went with all those goods that came back paid higher tariffs when those British goods came into the country too. And that was on things like wine, okay, cloth, furniture, you name it. So remember, Southerners began to complain about that out of every 100 bales of cotton they were paying 40 bales in tax. Southern response to the tariff was nullification, and it creates a nullification crisis. We'll talk about the speakers. Why did Calhoun want to nullify? Because Southerners felt they were paying too much in taxes. And Calhoun is a South Carolinian. He writes in response to the tariff of abomination, the document called South Carolina, excellent Chris, South Carolina Exposition and Protest.